At 34,000 feet, Flight 782 glided smoothly above the Atlantic, its engines humming like a lullaby. Inside, the passengers were calm, families chatting, travelers dozing, and flight attendants serving meals with warm smiles. To the pilot, Captain Aaron Miles, it was just another transatlantic routine, a flight he'd completed hundreds of times. But fate had written a different story that day. In seat 14B sat a woman who appeared unremarkable to anyone passing by. Her name was Elena Cruz. Dressed casually in jeans and a beige sweater, she blended into the background, quietly reading a book. Yet, behind her calm eyes lay a past that few could imagine. Elena had once been part of an intelligence unit specializing in crisis negotiation. Years ago, she'd left that life behind, seeking peace away from chaos. But as Flight 782 soared through blue skies, that peace was about to shatter. The first sign came as a muffled argument near the rear cabin. A passenger shouted, then a tray clattered to the floor. The crew rushed to calm the situation, but before they could, the cabin filled with panic. A group of men stood up suddenly, faces hidden, demanding everyone stay seated. The pilot's voice echoed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm." But even as he spoke, Captain Miles's hands trembled slightly. He looked through the security feed and saw the chaos unfold. In the middle of it all, one passenger wasn't moving, wasn't screaming. Elena Cruz sat still, her breathing even, her eyes locked on the threat. The pilot whispered to his co-pilot, "Who is that woman? She's not panicking like the others." He had no idea, but what she was about to do would defy every expectation. The cabin was filled with shouts, trembling voices, and terrified sobs. Passengers clung to one another, praying under their breath. One of the hijackers barked orders, pacing the aisle, his voice sharp and commanding. Yet amidst that storm of fear, Elena remained composed. She lowered her head slightly, appearing submissive, but her eyes never stopped moving. She was assessing, counting the men, their movements, their coordination. Years of training resurfaced in silence. The pilot kept glancing at her through the cabin camera. He couldn't understand how she could stay so still. "She's calm," he murmured, too calm. Down below, Elena observed one of the men trembling slightly as he guarded the passengers. His hands shook whenever his partner turned away. Fear, she knew, was the weakest link. She breathed deeply, slow and steady, letting herself blend into the terrified crowd. Panic draws attention. Calmness makes you invisible. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, centering her thoughts. There were no weapons in her hands, no backup team waiting. All she had was her mind and the courage she'd buried long ago. One of the hijackers turned toward her row and barked, head down. Elena obeyed instantly, her face unreadable. But inside, her mind was already in motion, strategizing, analyzing, predicting. She noticed the rhythm of their communication, the way one gave orders while two others obeyed. That meant a chain of command, and every chain had a weak link. The pilot's voice returned over the intercom, calm but strained. "We are cooperating. Please, nobody move." Elena knew that meant he was stalling. He was buying time, and time was exactly what she needed. As the chaos stretched on, she whispered quietly to herself, "Stay focused. Not yet. Wait for the moment." The pilot, watching from his cockpit, still couldn't take his eyes off her. Hours passed in tense silence. The aircraft changed course, directed by the hijackers toward an unknown destination. Outside, fighter jets shadowed the plane from a safe distance. Inside, fear thickened like smoke. Passengers were exhausted, eyes red from crying. The leader of the hijackers barked orders again, demanding refueling permission. His voice was harsh, confident, but Elena saw what others missed, small cracks in his control. He was sweating now, his voice shaking ever so slightly when he shouted. Stress was eating at him. Elena knew fear was contagious, and soon it would spread even among them. The young man holding a weapon near her row was barely older than 20. His hands trembled. When he turned to look at her, she met his gaze, not with anger, but with something unexpected, empathy. She whispered softly, "You don't have to do this." He froze for a second, startled. "Be quiet," he hissed, but his voice wavered. That tiny hesitation told her everything. There was still humanity in him. The pilot's voice came again, reassuring the passengers, but his tone cracked. In the cockpit, Captain Miles's heart pounded. "She's talking to one of them," he whispered to the co-pilot. "What is she doing?" Elena didn't answer anyone. She kept her voice low and steady, planting seeds of doubt in the young man's mind. The leader shouted again, breaking the moment. But the damage was done. Elena had started to turn the tide, not through force, but through psychology. If I can make one of them question their orders, she thought, I can break their control. The cabin returned to uneasy silence. Outside, night fell across the ocean. Inside, one woman's quiet courage was beginning to shift the balance of fear. The plane touched down briefly at a remote airfield for refueling. Governments negotiated over radio frequencies, trying to buy time. Tension inside was unbearable. The hijackers argued among themselves while keeping their weapons visible. Elena stayed silent, observing every gesture, every slip. When the young man, the same one she had spoken to earlier, passed near her again, she leaned forward and whispered just loud enough for him to hear, "They'll sacrifice you first." He froze, his pulse visible on his neck. "Help me," she said softly. "We can stop them together." He looked torn, his eyes flicking between her and the others. "I can't," he muttered. "They'll kill me." Elena's tone was calm, almost motherly. "Not if we act smart. Trust me." He hesitated but didn't walk away. The pilot's voice interrupted over the intercom, trying to calm passengers, but his attention remained fixed on the camera feed. "She's doing something," he whispered, astonished. "I don't know what, but she's doing something." In the next few minutes, Elena learned vital details, the number of weapons, their routine, and when they rotated guard positions. Every piece of information was a step toward survival. The refueling ended. The engines roared back to life, and the plane lifted once again into the dark sky. Elena closed her eyes and planned carefully. It has to be quick, she thought. One distraction, one opening, one strike. The young man she had reached looked terrified, yet there was resolve in his trembling eyes now. He had made his choice. Above the clouds, as passengers tried to stay calm, a silent alliance formed. One between a woman who refused to break and a boy who had lost his way. The pilot had no idea that the balance of power was about to shift. Midnight blanketed the sky outside. Inside the cabin, fatigue dulled fear into quiet despair. Passengers sat motionless, whispering prayers. The hijackers seemed overconfident now, believing no one would dare resist. But Elena's eyes stayed sharp. Every second, she measured their distance, their patterns, and the moment to strike. She glanced at the young accomplice. He nodded slightly. It was time. The plan was simple. Create a distraction big enough to break their rhythm. He stood suddenly, pretending to trip. His weapon clattered to the floor. The leader spun toward him, furious. That split second was all Elena needed. She moved like lightning. Her elbow struck the nearest hijacker's arm, disarming him before he could react. Gasps filled the air. The pilot, watching through the cabin camera, stood frozen. "She's fighting them," he whispered in disbelief. Chaos erupted, but Elena stayed focused, swift, and deliberate. She used what the plane offered, seat belts, trays, and her agility, to outmaneuver her opponents without lethal force. One man lunged. She ducked and shoved him against the aisle wall. Another reached for his weapon, but a passenger kicked it away. The tide had turned. Fear that once belonged to the passengers now gripped their captors. "Secure them," Elena shouted. Her calm, commanding voice cut through the noise. The pilot could hear every word through the feed. "She's leading them," he said in awe. Within moments, two hijackers were restrained by passengers using belts and cables. The leader tried to fight back, but Elena blocked him with precision, pinning him down without unnecessary harm. Silence followed, thick and heavy. The pilot's voice finally returned, trembling with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are safe." Applause erupted, mixed with sobs of relief. And amid it all, Elena simply sat back down, exhausted but composed, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. When Flight 782 landed under military escort, news cameras swarmed the runway. The world had already heard the unbelievable story, a mysterious woman who helped save an entire flight. Reporters begged for interviews, officials demanded details, but Elena Cruz quietly slipped away. She gave no statements, no heroic speeches. She simply smiled, thanked the pilot, and disappeared into the crowd. Captain Miles stood watching her go, still stunned. "She changed everything," he said softly. "She saved us all." In the days that followed, headlines blazed across every major network. Unknown passenger foils mid-air hijacking. The calm woman who outsmarted terrorists. Asterisk, a real-life hero at 34,000 feet. Asterisk, survivors called her an angel, a savior, a miracle. But Elena refused fame. She knew heroism wasn't about being seen. It was about doing what needed to be done when no one else could. The young man who had helped her cooperated with authorities, later confessing that her words had broken through his fear. "She didn't just save lives," he said. "She saved me from myself." As the story spread, millions watched and wondered, what would I have done in her place? The pilot often replayed that moment when he first saw her calm face on the monitor. The image of one woman sitting still while the world around her unraveled. That calmness, he said in an interview, was the beginning of hope. And so, the legend of Elena Cruz lived on, not as a soldier or a spy, but as proof of what courage looks like in its purest form. Quiet, composed, and unstoppable. If you were on that flight, would you have stayed calm? Or would fear have taken control? Tell us your thoughts below. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply stay calm when the world panics.